In the human mind, a continent is a definitive fact. It is a massive terrestrial platform that stands defiant against the encroachment of the sea. We look at the vast blue expanses of our globe, and we often see them as empty space, the negative gaps between the real parts of our world. It is a strange irony that we have mapped the scarred deserts of Mars and the frozen craters of the Moon with greater precision than we have mapped the valleys of our own deep oceans. We assume that if something as massive as a continent existed, we would surely have seen it by now. Stretching from the tropical reefs of New Caledonia down to the sub-Antarctic depths south of New Zealand lies a hidden giant. It is a vast, continuous block of continental crust 5 million square kilometers in size. To put that in perspective, it is nearly 2/3 the size of Australia and larger than the Indian subcontinent. Yet 94% of it is submerged, lost in a world of perpetual twilight. Geologists have named it Zealandia, but to me it has always felt like a ghost continent. I found myself asking the same question that baffled the scientific community for decades. Why? Why did a continent as large as this vanish? What violent slow-motion catastrophe had the power to pull an entire world beneath the waves, turning a terrestrial paradise into a silent kingdom of silt and stone? 85 million years ago, during the twilight of the dinosaurs, Zealandia was the heart of the supercontinent Gondwana. It was the bridge that connected Australia to the frozen reaches of Antarctica. But then the Earth's interior began to stir. The tectonic plates began a violent, agonizing divorce. As I traced the rift lines in the crustal data, I saw the evidence of a planet stretching itself apart. Zealandia was caught in the middle of a titanic tug of war. As the crust became thinner, it lost its buoyancy. It began to sink slowly at first and then inevitably into the abyss. By the time the dinosaurs were vanishing, Zealandia was already a drowning world. It was a continent performing a slow-motion retreat into the dark. By 23 million years ago, it was almost entirely gone, a lost world that the rest of the planet simply forgot. The discovery of Zealandia isn't just a win for geography. It is a fundamental shift in our understanding of the home we take for granted. It proves that the Earth is an unfinished masterpiece, a restless, shifting machine that is constantly recycling its own history. In this investigation, I want to take you with me into the world below. We are going to peel back the layers of the Pacific to reveal the jagged mountains and hidden plains of the 8th continent. We are going to look at the fossil evidence, the pollen, and the spores that prove this sunless abyss was once a lush green paradise. We are going to deconstruct the physics of a world that lost its battle with gravity. My name is Tann, and this is Y Zone 360. Today we are going to rewrite the map. The Pacific Ocean, for most of our history, has been a shroud, a vast blue curtain that hides the true face of our planet. If you were to sail across the Southwest Pacific today, you would see nothing but an endless rhythmic horizon of waves. Even with our most advanced cameras, the world below remains a dark enigma. Sunlight is swallowed by the ocean within the first few hundred meters, leaving the remaining kilometers in absolute crushing darkness. This is why, for centuries, Zealandia remained a ghost. We were looking at the ocean, but we weren't looking through it. We saw New Zealand and New Caledonia as isolated accidents of geography, lonely outposts in a watery void. When I filtered the noise and looked at the gravity anomaly maps, the empty Pacific disappeared. Beneath the waves, the data revealed a massive elevated plateau, a monolithic block of rock that refused to blend in with the thin oceanic crust. I saw sharp, defined boundaries where the deep sea met a highland that was once dry land. For years, the scientific community hesitated. They called Zealandia a plateau, a fragment, or a microcontinent. But the data I followed led to a turning point in 2017. A team of 11 geologists finally looked at the same evidence I'm showing you and made a radical choice. They rewrote the world. By analyzing rock samples dredged from the deep, they found not just volcanic basalt, but granite and sedimentary rocks, the DNA of a continent. Zealandia met every criteria: high elevation, diverse geology, and a crust thick enough to be considered a peer to Africa or the Americas. To understand the tragedy of its disappearance, we have to look past the digital grids. We have to look at the scars of a planetary divorce that happened 85 million years ago. To understand why Zealandia is a ghost, we have to look at the Earth when it was whole. 85 million years ago, our planet was a different world. There were no separate islands of New Zealand or New Caledonia. Instead, there was a titan called Gondwana. Deep below Gondwana, a massive plume of superheated rock began to rise. It was like a blowtorch held against a sheet of thick wax. The crust began to weaken. The foundations of the supercontinent started to soften and swell. The Great Divorce was about to begin, and Zealandia was the child caught in the middle of a titanic separation. Here is the why behind the tragedy. As Zealandia was pulled, its crust began to thin. It lost its ability to float. Over millions of years, the land began to sag. The vast river valleys were the first to be swallowed by the sea, then the forests, then the plains. Zealandia was performing a slow-motion retreat into the abyss, unable to hold its head above the rising tides of the Pacific. By the time the dinosaurs were wiped out 65 million years ago, Zealandia was already a drowning world. The divorce was finalized. Australia moved north toward the equator, and Antarctica drifted south into the deep freeze. Zealandia was left behind, isolated in the vastness of the South Pacific. But even as it sank, it remained defiant. It refused to disappear completely. The stretching finally stopped about 25 million years ago. By then, 94% of the continent was submerged. Only the highest mountain peaks and the most stubborn volcanic ridges remained above the waves, the jagged spine that we now know as New Zealand, and the tropical outposts of New Caledonia. When I look at New Zealand today, I don't see a small island nation. I see the final breath of a sunken titan. I see a survivor that has spent 85 million years trying to keep its head above water while the rest of its body is pinned down by 2 kilometers of ocean. But if Zealandia was once part of Gondwana, if it was once a green paradise, then it must have left something behind. It must have a memory. In 2017, a team of scientists decided to do something impossible. They decided to drill into the heart of the ghost. And what they found, buried in the mud, was a message from a world that had been forgotten for eons. A message that proved beyond any doubt that Zealandia was once a world as vibrant as our own. A team of international scientists sailed to the remote reaches of the Tasman Sea, positioned directly above the submerged plains of Zealandia. Their goal was ambitious: to reach into the dark and pull out a piece of the ghost. I watched the records of the drilling process. It is a violent, precise surgical strike into the Earth's crust. They sent drills down through 2 kilometers of water and then another kilometer deep into the seafloor itself. They were looking for core samples, long cylindrical tubes of rock and mud that act like the pages of a prehistoric book. As I studied the analysis of what they pulled to the surface, I realized they hadn't just found rocks. They had found a library of ghosts. The most shocking discovery wasn't a giant skeleton or a sunken city. It was something much smaller and much more profound. Deep within the sediment layers, dating back 60 to 70 million years, the scientists found pollen. Not marine pollen, but the pollen of land-based flowering plants. They found the spores of ferns that only grow in damp terrestrial forests. They proved that Zealandia wasn't just a shallow plateau. It was a lush green world, vibrant with life and connected to the ancient land masses of Australia and Antarctica. Zealandia was once a sanctuary, a corridor of life that existed in a window of time we are only just beginning to comprehend. But why did the garden die? I realized that Zealandia didn't just sink. It was dragged down by the shifting weight of the planet. It was a world that lost its battle with gravity. Zealandia is a reminder that the Earth is a scavenger. It creates beautiful things only to reclaim them, hiding its most magnificent memories in the one place it knows we cannot reach. The investigation into the 8th continent forces us to ask what other gardens are hiding in the dark. What other worlds are waiting to be named? 94% of Zealandia is lost to the abyss, but the 6% that remains the land we call New Zealand and New Caledonia is some of the most spectacular geography on our planet. If you were to stand on the western coast of the South Island and drain away the Pacific, you wouldn't be looking at a shoreline. You would be standing on the edge of a continental cliff, dropping thousands of meters into a silent, sunless void. New Zealand is not just a nation. It is the spine of a continent. It is a fortress of rock that has spent 85 million years resisting the relentless weight of the ocean. But I found myself asking, why did these specific pieces survive? Why didn't the entire continent vanish into the dark? Here is the irony of Zealandia's survival. The very forces that are trying to tear the Earth apart are the same forces that saved these remnants from a watery grave. The collision of these two massive plates acts like a giant forge. It crumples the crust, pushing the rock upward faster than the ocean can wear it down. The Southern Alps are not just mountains, they are a tectonic breath. They are being actively pushed toward the sky at a rate of millimeters per year. New Zealand exists today because it is caught in a planetary vice, squeezed into the light, while the rest of its body remains pinned in the dark. Far to the north, I found another survivor with a very different story, New Caledonia. While New Zealand is a land of fire and ice, New Caledonia is a tropical relic. But don't let the white sands fool you. This island is a biological ark. Because it was part of Zealandia, it carried a unique cargo of life away from the great supercontinents millions of years ago. I was moved by the story of the amberella, a small shrub found only in the forests of New Caledonia. It is the most primitive living flowering plant on Earth, a ghost from the era of Gondwana. It has survived on this fragment of Zealandia while the rest of the world evolved and changed around it. If we define a continent by its dry land, Zealandia is a failure. But as an investigator, I have to look past the present. Is this the end of the story? Is Zealandia a dying world performing a final slow-motion descent? Or is it a masterpiece in progress to find the answer we have to look at the future of our planet? Because the Earth never finishes a map. We look at the 7 continents and we see a final product. We see permanence. But the Earth is not a statue. It is an unfinished masterpiece. As I projected the current tectonic movements into the future 1050, even 100 million years from now, the illusion of the present began to dissolve. I realized that Zealandia is not a corpse. It is a work in progress. Just offshore of New Zealand lies the Kermadec Tonga Trench, one of the deepest chasms on Earth. Here the Pacific Plate is diving beneath the Australian Plate in a violent process called subduction. This is the engine of Zealandia's potential rebirth. In the next 50 million years, as the Pacific Plate continues its relentless march, more of Zealandia may be forced back above the waves. I saw a future map where a massive landmass emerges from the abyss, connecting the scattered islands into a unified subcontinent once again. The 8th continent existed for millions of years before the first human looked at the stars, and it will likely still be shifting long after our cities have turned to dust. Zealandia teaches us that change is not a catastrophe, it is the pulse of the planet. The drowning of a world was a tragedy for the creatures that lived there 60 million years ago, but it created the unique environments we cherish today. If a giant like Zealandia could hide for 85 million years, what else are we missing? What other worlds are waiting beneath the blue ink of our maps? Zealandia is more than just a geological anomaly. It is a stark reminder of the limits of our perception. We walk upon a planet of secrets, defining our world by its surface, by the parts that are easy to see and convenient to map. The Ghost Continent teaches us that discovery is not a destination, but a way of seeing. It tells us that the most magnificent stories are often the ones we haven't yet learned how to read. As the light of our technology reaches further into the dark, we realize that the Earth isn't just a rock in space, it is an unfinished masterpiece still being painted by the relentless hands of time and gravity.